Hey there, I'm a film student and I'm going to give you my take on... We'll dive into 5 categories and score each of them out of 10. Total them up and that's the film's overall score. Now let's get into the story. I'll start by giving a summary of the story. Our journey begins with, funnily enough, Harry, an orphan who is living a horrid life with his neglectful aunt and uncle. Little does he know, his world's about to absolutely flip. Enter Hagrid, a half-giant, half-man with a heart of gold, aiming to deliver Harry a letter from Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry learns that he's a wizard and that his parents, who are also wizards, got killed by the Dark Lord Voldemort when he was a baby. Hogwarts becomes Harry's home more than his aunts and uncles ever was. He quickly forms a tight bond with Ron Weasley, a sweet redhead from a broke but loving wizard family, and Hermione Granger, a brilliant but very smug witch. Oh yeah, and he's also sorted into Gryffindor, which is one of the 4 houses at Hogwarts. And if you want to know what house you'd be sorted into, well, there's a brilliant video about that on my channel, which I will leave a link up here, so you can take a look at that if you want. Further into the school year, which for the UK is between September and July, strange things start to happen. The kids find a 3-headed dog guarding a trap door of some kind on the forbidden 3rd floor and begin to unravel the mystery surrounding what's inside. The Philosopher's Stone, a powerful and magical artifact hidden within Hogwarts. Through a series of adventures and challenges, the trio discovers that the stone holds the power to immortality and is being hunted by someone evil. And the 3-headed dog makes a lot more sense now. The kids first assume Professor Snape, a dark and dislikable teacher who for some reason has it out for these guys. But it's actually revealed that Professor Quirrell, the shy, stuttering Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, is under the influence of Voldemort who needs the stone to be resurrected. The climax of this film takes place in the underground chambers of Hogwarts, where these kids have to go through trials and obstacles to get to the stone before Voldemort can. They find a plant that wants to eat them, a chessboard that can kill you, and an enchanted mirror. In the final confrontation, Harry stops Voldemort from getting the stone and saves the day. And Dumbledore, the school's headmaster, begins to take a liking to these students. The school year finishes with Gryffindor winning the House Cup, and Harry sadly having to return to the Dursleys, but only for the summer. To sum it up, Harry Potter's first year at Hogwarts is a roller coaster of magical discoveries, friendships, and realising Voldemort isn't as dead as everyone thought. The film successfully introduces us into an enchanting world of wizards, witches, spells, and Quidditch, setting the stage for all that's to come up in future films and reviews. The pacing's captivating and the characters are brought to life through an already incredible book. So, story gets a 7 out of 10. Now I'm sure you'll have realised by now that these main characters didn't have much acting experience, and not because they're bad, they're just, well, they're kids. And fun fact, director Chris Columbus actually had a way of keeping them in check. Every time they disturbed the take, Chris would give them a red card, which meant they had to put £10 in a pot that would end up going to charity. Tom Felton, who played Malfoy, said that Rupert Grint was fined £2,500 in the first 2 films alone because he couldn't control his laughter. Also, loads of kids came back throughout the films with the same role, and on top of this, they all had school together because the director wanted to make sure they still had that school experience, which I think shows in the final thing very clearly. Like, they all looked like genuine school friends because they actually were. Anyway, the kids weren't the only ones to give great performances. Hagrid, that half-giant, was played by Robbie Coltrane. He turned Hagrid into my favourite character with the way he played him. Just so caring and a great example of comic relief.
I shouldn't have told you that.
Where are you going? Where are you...
Alan Rickman did an awesome job of playing Snape, making the character so easily hateable, but of course that will all change later in the series. But the thing that did it for me the most was the child acting, and not from the trio, like they played their parts awesomely, but all the background characters. They're all so authentic, and of course you can't take away from their talent, but I do think Chris Columbus did a great job of making sure it felt that way. Actually, speaking of which, I haven't really talked about the main actors, have I? So Daniel Radcliffe nearly didn't go for it because he didn't want to be a child star in Hollywood, but they, reassured the parents that it was just going to be filmed on the outskirts of London. I always thought he seemed quite mature in his performance, which I think worked really well, but of course he still had a lot of room to grow, which is very apparent in the later films. Here's a fun fact, during the casting of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Daniel, Rupert and Emma were all asked to write an essay on their characters. Watson gave in 16 full pages, Radcliffe gave in 1, and Grint completely forgot. The adults were great role models and just let the kids be kids, which I think ended up being the best choice. So after all this, I'm going to give the performance a 7 out of 10. So talking about cinematography, I just want to focus on a few scenes or shots. Here we see Harry in his Quidditch robes holding a broom, about to enter the stadium for his first ever match. You can see the lighting here is all from the front. It's giving the effect he's going through 2 massive doors. The type of lighting used here is a type of what's called 3-point lighting. A big key light is bright enough to make it seem like it's actually coming from a stadium. This gives the effect that the further back you go, the less light and more shadows you have. 2 slightly dimmer lights called fill lights allow the shadows at the front to be filled in but not completely gone, which gives the effect that the light is actually coming from here. This is what 3-point lighting looks like, so when you use all 3 of these lights, you get a single effect that is like what you see here. The second scene I want to look at is when Harry's living in the lighthouse when his uncle's gone mad. Now, not to get philosophical on you here, but the way that John Seale, the cinematographer, used the lighting and dim settings here shows Harry's keeping calm and cool on the inside, even though so much is going wrong around him. But it still could also be seen like that storm being the anger and frustration in his heart. Anyway, now we're out of that, let me tell you how they did it. They use a technique called low-key lighting, which is pretty much exactly what you think. They'll use artificial lights to make it look like the moonlight and other natural lights are bright enough to see inside. And a way that you can tell when films do this is by looking for a high contrast, which means that the lights are easier to see and the shadows are really dark. In fact, going off script, let me show you what it would look like if there was none of that lighting. I'm going to turn off these 2 lights and the back one and just open the curtains so the moonlight can come in. Can you see me? Right. And the lightning, that was just them cranking the lights up to 11 for a couple of seconds. I love doing this, Jesus Christ. Also, quickly talking about camera angles, I thought the troll scene was done really well. The wide shot first shows its actual size and gets us intimidated and worried for Hermione. Then we have a much closer shot of Hermione crying until she looks up and we pretty much get her POV of the troll before it attacks. A classic way to reveal something big. Now, after all this, I don't want to say that the cinematography is great. I mean, everything I've talked to you about is pretty basic stuff. I mean, it did what it needed to, sure, but it didn't go out of its way to make something amazing. So for that, I'm just going to give it a middle of the road 5 out of 10. Right, sound. If you've seen my Star Wars review, you'll know all about my opinion on John Williams. And if you haven't, you should. So I'm going to leave an info card in the top right so you can check out that video and then come back to this. Anyway, John Williams strikes again. This is another one of my favourite scores from him. He does this amazing thing where he's able to define an entire franchise or film series with just the music. Think like Harry Potter, Star Wars, and Jaws. Now, when I personally think of Harry Potter, my brain immediately goes to... But why is this? Well, it's all about the impact the first time you watch it. William plays the theme itself once with just the Celesta before it throws you into the story. And after that scene, when the title card shows, you hear the same tune again, but this time with all the strings and orchestra in it too. This just shows the audience that when you hear this, you think of Harry. And this is Harry's theme, but technically it's Hedwig's theme. And the repetition of it throughout the film and even the series is exactly why you associate it with the name, even today. Secondly, I want to talk about that first scene that I just mentioned. So, it's called The Arrival of Baby Harry, and if I could sum it up in 2 words, it would be playfully haunting. But it still fits that childlike theme that the rest of the film follows, but I personally think that it has that haunting feel to it. Dumbledore moves around sort of like a ghost, and if you've read the first book, McGonagall is even sort of shown as a ghostly figure. This same childlike feel is also shown when they're in the Great Hall, and it just makes me wish that my school sounded like that, or at least had that atmosphere. So, yeah, not much else I could say without going on forever. I mean, the score is John Williams, isn't it? And not only that, but I'd say it's one of his best scores to date. And I'm sure you all saw this coming, but yeah, 10 out of 10. Starting off our final segment with a fun fact. In the Devil's Snare scene, they actually turned the plant into a giant puppet. The vines were wrapped around the 3 actors and then controlled by puppeteers, unravelling them and pulling them off behind the scenes. And after all this, they reversed it to make it look like the vines were latching on. Creepy. Anyway, this film is absolutely packed with all kinds of visual effects. Like the roof of the Great Hall, it was actually a miniature that was composited on top of the original shot, but this film has some not so great examples of CGI too. Take a look at this scene and comment if you know anything. I'll pin the first person. Did you notice it? What if I told you it wasn't the troll? Still no? Well, if I pause it here, you'll be able to see the abomination that I think is meant to be Harry Potter. And now I've shown you, you will never unsee it. And I know you might be thinking, this is probably an old film, right? Well, it was released in 2001, which, granted, was the same year as this. but also 2 years after this. The colours in this film are a lot more bright and golden compared to the other films. And this, in my opinion, is because Harry has a much more childlike wonder way of seeing the world. And I feel it works really well. It might be why this is my favourite film in the series. And you'll find that the palettes actually get darker as the series continues and he, grows up. But I'm getting off track. We're only talking about one film today. Speaking of which, in the scene where Harry gets his first wand, you may think that all the lighting changes and wands flying everywhere is done in post-production, but no, it's all practical. Similar to what you'd experience at Universal Studios. Editing-wise though, a scene I love is actually when Harry gets his first letter. We get lots of shots lingering on him and his expression as he's super fixated on what could be inside this letter. And then, boom. It cuts to Dudley realising he is post. The next few glances between Harry and his family tell us that they know something that he doesn't, and that shows the proper power imbalance, and I love it. I think this film made use of very clever editing techniques to bring this fantasy world to life. And the pacing of the scenes were great in some places and pretty average in others, so for that it gets a 7 out of 10 from me. Before we unveil the total score, I want to say, if you liked the video, please leave a like and comment if you agree or not. And be sure to follow my Instagram and TikTok for updates and short form content. To conclude, the final score for Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone is 32. Have a wonderful and productive day, and I really look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye bye.